1. The Forgotten Ring. Clara had always been fascinated by the stories that the dead could tell. As a morgue assistant, she often wondered about the lives of those who lay on the cold metal tables, their stories forever silenced. But one night, a particular story seemed to refuse to remain untold. It was a quiet evening when the body of an elderly woman was brought in. Clara noticed the woman's wrinkled hands, the veins like intricate maps of a life well lived. But what caught her attention was an ornate ring on the woman's finger. It was a beautiful piece, with a large sapphire surrounded by delicate diamonds. The blue stone seemed to shimmer even under the dim morgue lights. Tempted by its beauty, and thinking no one would notice, Clara carefully slid the ring off the woman's finger and put it on her own. It fit perfectly. She promised herself she'd return it before her shift ended. However, as the night wore on, strange things began to happen. Every time Clara passed by the elderly woman's body, she felt a cold breeze, even though there was no window or source of draft. Then she began to hear faint whispers, like someone calling out to her from a distance. The voice was soft, almost pleading. Clara tried to dismiss these occurrences as products of her tired mind, but when she went to wash her hands, she froze. In the mirror, she saw the reflection of the old woman standing behind her, pointing to her ringed finger. Clara spun around, but there was no one there. Panicking, she rushed back to the main room, only to find the woman's body exactly where she'd left it. But now, the room felt colder, the shadows darker. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. They seemed to be coming from the woman herself. Clara, her heart racing, pulled the ring from her finger and placed it back on the woman's hand. The moment she did, the room's temperature returned to normal, and the whispers ceased. Clara, shaken, sat down, trying to process what had just happened. The next morning, as the sun's first rays filtered into the morgue, an elderly man came in. He introduced himself as the deceased woman's son. As he approached his mother's body, he paused, his eyes fixed on the ring. "That ring," he began, his voice trembling, "has been in our family for generations. It's said to be haunted by our ancestors. They protect it, ensuring it's never taken from its rightful owner." Clara gulped, realizing the gravity of her actions. She confessed to the man about what she'd done and the events of the night. To her surprise, he smiled gently. "I'm glad you returned it," he said. "My mother was very attached to that ring. It's a symbol of our family's legacy. I believe she wanted to make sure it stayed with her, even in death." Clara nodded, her eyes moist. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. The man patted her hand. "It's all right. You've learned a valuable lesson. Some things, especially those with deep histories, are better left untouched." As he left with his mother's body, Clara sat in the quiet morgue, reflecting on the night's events. She realized that the dead do have stories to tell, and sometimes they demand to be heard. From that day on, she treated every body with the utmost respect, understanding that each one carried a legacy, a history, and sometimes a protective spirit. 2. The morgue's last patient. Mark had always been a man of science, never one to believe in ghost stories or the supernatural. As a morgue technician, he had seen his fair share of death, but everything had a logical explanation. That was until he noticed the peculiarities of drawer number 13. Every time Mark opened that particular drawer, an icy chill would greet him. Even though the temperature settings for all the drawers were identical, he'd often find himself shivering, the cold seeming to seep into his very bones. It was as if the drawer held more than just the remains of the deceased. Curiosity piqued, Mark decided to delve into the records. He discovered that decades ago, a man named Samuel had been kept in drawer 13. Samuel had died under mysterious circumstances, and rumors had swirled around town about foul play, though nothing was ever proven. As days turned into weeks, Mark began to see fleeting apparitions of a man, always near drawer 13. The figure appeared distressed, pacing back and forth, as if searching for something or someone. Mark would blink, and the figure would vanish, leaving him questioning his sanity. Determined to find answers, Mark began researching Samuel's life. He discovered that Samuel had been a kind-hearted man, known for his generosity. However, he had been wrongly accused of a crime he didn't commit, The town had turned against him, and he had died with his name tarnished. One evening, as Mark was poring over old newspaper clippings, he felt a cold hand on his shoulder. Startled, he turned to find Samuel's apparition, looking at him with pleading eyes. Mark could feel the weight of the man's anguish and desperation. Realizing that Samuel's spirit was trapped, unable to find peace due to the injustice done to him, Mark decided to set things right. He reached out to a local journalist, sharing Samuel's story and the evidence he had uncovered that proved Samuel's innocence. The story was published, and the town was abuzz with talk of Samuel's wrongful accusation. People began to come forward, sharing their memories of Samuel and expressing their remorse for how he had been treated. A few weeks later, a ceremony was held in Samuel's honor. The town gathered to pay their respects, and a memorial was erected in his name. As the sun set, Mark stood by the memorial, feeling a warmth envelop him. He looked around and saw Samuel's apparition one last time. The spirit smiled, gratitude evident in his eyes, before fading away. The next day, Mark went to the morgue and hesitantly approached drawer 13. He opened it, half expecting the familiar icy chill, but to his surprise, the drawer felt just like the others. The coldness, the haunting presence, had vanished. Mark realized that by helping to clear Samuel's name, he had not only brought peace to a tormented soul, but had also learned a valuable lesson about justice, compassion, and the power of redemption. From that day on, drawer 13 was just another drawer in the morgue. But for Mark, it served as a constant reminder that every life has a story, and sometimes, those stories need a voice to set them free. The Midnight Lullaby. Sarah had always found solace in the stillness of the morgue during her night shifts. The quiet was a reprieve from the chaos of the outside world. However, that tranquility was shattered one evening when a soft, haunting lullaby began to echo through the cold, sterile room at precisely midnight. The melody was both beautiful and melancholic, tugging at Sarah's heartstrings. She searched the morgue, trying to find the source of the singing, but found herself alone. The lullaby would play for a few minutes and then fade away, leaving Sarah in bewildered silence. Curious, Sarah began to investigate. She learned that exactly a year ago, a young woman named Lila had been brought to the morgue. Lila had tragically died in a car crash, leaving behind a grieving husband and an unborn child. The accident had occurred at midnight. As the days passed, the lullaby continued. Sarah felt an inexplicable connection to the song, as if it was calling out to her. One evening, while going through some old records, she stumbled upon a small, wind-up music box among Lila's personal belongings. The ornate box was adorned with intricate carvings of a mother cradling a child. When Sarah wound it up, it played the same haunting lullaby she heard every night. Realizing the significance of the music box, Sarah decided to play it at midnight, hoping to connect with Lila's spirit. As the clock struck 12, she wound up the music box, and the room was filled with the familiar melody. But this time, it was accompanied by a soft, ethereal voice singing along. Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she felt Lila's presence enveloping the room. The atmosphere was thick with sorrow and longing. Sarah could sense Lila's deep love for her unborn child and the life she had lost too soon. As the music box's melody came to an end, Sarah whispered, "Lila, your song has been heard. It's time for you to find peace." The room grew silent, and for the first time in weeks, the lullaby did not play at midnight. The following night, Sarah felt a mixture of relief and sadness, knowing that Lila's spirit had finally found rest. A few days later, a man named Ethan came to the morgue. He introduced himself as Lila's husband. Sarah recognized the pain in his eyes, a reflection of the grief she had felt from Lila's spirit. Ethan explained that he had come to collect Lila's belongings, hoping to find some closure. Sarah handed him the music box, explaining its significance. As Ethan held the box, tears welled up in his eyes. He shared that he had gifted it to Lila when they found out they were expecting. It was meant to be a lullaby for their unborn child. The two sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the loss hanging heavily between them. Sarah finally spoke. "I believe Lila wanted you to have this. It's a piece of her, a memory of the love you shared." Ethan nodded, clutching the music box close to his heart. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. As he left the morgue, Sarah watched him go, realizing that the music box was not just a lullaby for an unborn child, but also a testament to the enduring power of love, even in the face of death. From that day on, the morgue returned to its usual stillness. But for Sarah, the memory of the Midnight Lullaby and the love story it represented would forever remain etched in her heart. 4. The disappearing tattoo. Jake had always been a stickler for details. As a morgue employee, he prided himself on his meticulous nature, ensuring that every procedure was followed to the letter. But one particular body, that of a middle-aged man with raven black hair, presented a mystery that Jake couldn't ignore. The man had a unique tattoo on his forearm, an intricate maze with a heart at its center. Jake found it fascinating and made a mental note of its position. However, when he returned after a short break, he was startled to find the tattoo had shifted to the man's upper arm. Thinking he had made an error, Jake brushed it off. But as the hours passed, the tattoo seemed to move again, this time to the man's chest. Confused and intrigued, Jake began researching the significance of the tattoo. He discovered it represented an ancient legend about souls trapped between worlds, trying to find their way to the heart, the center of the maze, to find peace. As days turned into nights, Jake began experiencing strange time lapses. He'd find himself in places in the morgue he didn't remember going to, always drawn to the body with the shifting tattoo. One evening, as he stood by the body, he felt a sudden pull, and the world around him blurred. Jake found himself in a vast, endless maze, the walls towering above him. Panic set in as he realized he was trapped. He began to run, trying to find an exit, but every turn led to another dead end. The weight of despair grew with each passing moment. Suddenly, a soft voice echoed through the maze, guiding Jake. "Follow my voice," it whispered. Trusting his instincts, Jake followed the voice, which led him to the heart at the center of the maze. There, he found the spirit of the man with the tattoo, looking just as lost and confused. The spirit introduced himself as Elias and explained that he had been trapped in the maze for what felt like an eternity. The tattoo was a curse, a punishment for a mistake he had made in his past. Every time someone noticed the tattoo, they were pulled into the maze, adding to Elias' torment. Jake, determined to break the curse, asked Elias about the mistake he had made. Elias confessed that he had betrayed a close friend out of jealousy, leading to the friend's untimely death. The tattoo was a reminder of his guilt, and the maze represented the prison of his own making. Realizing that redemption was the key, Jake urged Elias to seek forgiveness. Together, they navigated the maze, following the voice that had guided Jake earlier. It led them to the spirit of Elias's friend, who had been waiting for Elias to find him and make amends. Elias, tears streaming down his face, apologized for his betrayal. The friend, with a sad smile, forgave him, and the maze around them began to crumble. Jake felt a rush of air, and suddenly he was back in the morgue, standing by Elias's body. The tattoo, now permanently etched on Elias's forearm, no longer shifted. Jake realized that by helping Elias find redemption, he had not only freed a trapped soul but had also learned a profound lesson about forgiveness and the chains of guilt. From that day on, Jake approached his work with a newfound respect for the stories each body carried. He understood that every mark, every scar, had a tale to tell, and sometimes those tales held the key to setting souls free. 5. The silent phone calls. The morgue was a place of finality, where the stories of the departed came to a close. But for Emma, the morgue's receptionist, a new story was about to unfold. Every night, at precisely 9:03 p.m., the phone at the reception desk would ring. Emma would pick it up, expecting to hear a voice on the other end, but there was only silence. The calls were unnerving, and no matter how many times she checked the caller ID, the number was always blocked. At first, Emma dismissed the calls as pranks, but as days turned into weeks, the consistency of the calls began to weigh on her. She decided to investigate and traced the calls back to an old, disconnected phone line in the morgue's basement. Curious and a bit apprehensive, Emma ventured into the basement, Amidst the old files and dusty shelves, she found an ancient-looking telephone, its cord cut, and its surface covered in a thick layer of dust. It was clear the phone hadn't been used in years. As she examined the phone, Emma stumbled upon an old logbook nearby. Flipping through its pages, she discovered records of phone calls made to and from the morgue. One entry caught her eye, a series of calls made every night at 9:03 p.m. to a worker named Thomas. The calls had been logged decades ago. Intrigued, Emma decided to dig deeper into Thomas's history. She learned that he had been a dedicated morgue employee, often working late into the night. Tragically, he had died in the basement under mysterious circumstances. The most heart-wrenching detail was that Thomas's family, especially his young daughter, would call him every night at 9:03 p.m. to say goodnight. Connecting the dots, Emma realized that the silent calls were from Thomas's daughter, trying to reach her father one last time. The thought of the young girl's spirit still trying to connect with her deceased father sent shivers down Emma's spine. Determined to help the restless spirit find peace, Emma brought an old phone to the basement and connected it to the disconnected line. That night, as the clock struck 9:03 p.m., the phone rang. With a deep breath, Emma answered. This time, there wasn't just silence. A soft, childlike voice whispered, "Daddy." Emma's voice trembled as she responded, "Your father isn't here, but he loves you very much. It's time for both of you to find peace." There was a pause, and then the voice replied, "Thank you," before the line went dead. The next day, Emma visited Thomas' grave, leaving a bouquet of flowers and a note expressing her hope that he and his daughter had been reunited. From that night on, the silent phone calls ceased. The old phone in the basement remained silent, a testament to a bond that even death couldn't break. Emma often thought about Thomas and his daughter, reminded of the enduring power of love and the importance of letting go. The morgue, once a place of endings, had become a place of new beginnings for her, a reminder that every soul has a story, and sometimes those stories need a gentle nudge to reach their final chapter. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the Dark Tales Unleashed channel for more such content.